The town of Dusty Hollow sprawled crookedly along the dry bend of the Rio Seco, a scatter of weather-worn buildings that seemed to hide more secrets than any honest man could stomach. Folks here liked things simple order stories, and women who stayed quiet. Anything that didn't fit that mold stirred the dust quicker than a summer breeze. And Clara Boone, the young schoolteacher from the east, fit Dusty Hollow about as well as a feathered hat fits a cattle hand. She had arrived with little more than 2 trunks, a leather-bound Bible from her mother, and a maybe naive belief that education could soften hard lives. For a time the children loved her gentle voice and patient manner, but the adults whispered she spoke too much sense, especially when she dared to talk about fairness, decency, and keeping the school's books clean. In Dusty Hollow, decency was a matter of convenience. The trouble started when the school fund, a neat $200 saved from months of bake sales and church drives, vanished. Clara had kept the accounts with neat handwriting and careful columns. But when the ledger was found, the numbers smeared, and the dates altered, all fingers pointed to her. Or so the men wanted it to seem. Jeb Pierce, the owner of the Silver Mule Saloon, carried more whiskey in his belly than mercy in his heart. He had once been accused by Clara herself of striking a boy who had skipped out on dishwashing. No one in Dusty Hollow liked being corrected, least of all Jeb. When the school fund disappeared, he was the first to point at Clara with a smirk sharp enough to cut rope. The town council didn't bother asking Clara's side. They gathered on the creaking porch of the sheriff's office, muttering about a sinful girl with fancy deceptions. Then they did what Dusty Hollow always did. They let the fists of lesser men enforce the law. They were too cowardly to uphold it. It was near midnight when Clara heard the boots outside her small rented shack, heavy, uneven steps. The kind belonging to men who'd drunk more than they thought. Before she could reach the door, it burst open. 3 figures filled the frame, Zeke and Gus, Jeb's most loyal hounds. Before she could scream, a rough hand clamped over her mouth. Another grabbed her wrists, yanking them behind her. She felt the burn of hemp rope against her skin. "Town wants the truth," Zeke slurred, breath thick with whiskey. "And you're gonna tell it, schoolmarm." Clara tried to speak. "I am telling the truth," she tried to say, but the words were swallowed by the cloth tied over her mouth. They dragged her outside into the cool desert night. The moon hung full and silver, casting a pale glow over the low ridge and distant cottonwoods. The air smelled of dust and sharp juniper. They tied her to the back of a mule and led her toward the water. Moonwater Lake, a mile and a half from town, was sacred to the Apache and feared by the superstitious folk of Dusty Hollow. Folks whispered that spirits walked there on the full moon, calling out to the living. No one dared go near after dark, except men too cruel or too drunk to fear anything. The closer they rode, the colder it seemed. Clara's bare feet brushed sagebrush and pebbles as the mule trotted. The moon's reflection shimmered across the lake, a long silver path, like a road meant for spirits, not mortals. Zeke dismounted, first yanking Clara down with a thud that knocked the wind from her. Gus and Zeke hauled her upright by her bound arms, dragging her across the shoreline. The lake smelled of minerals and pine sap from the groves beyond. The crickets, usually loud this time of night, had gone strangely silent. Zeke grinned. "They say water like this shows a liar her own reflection shows her guilt. Maybe it'll make you confess, little miss." Gus snorted. "Or she just won't come back up. Either way, our job's done." Clara shook her head violently, pleading through the gag. She tried to brace her heels in the gravel, but the men were stronger and fear stole her strength. They dragged her to the shallows, the cold bite of water hitting her ankles first, then her calves. Her breath came fast and shallow. Moonlight turned the lake to a sheet of trembling quicksilver. A wind swept over the water, carrying a low hum like a distant song. Even the men shivered. "Get on with it!" Zeke snapped through his voice wavered. Gus placed his hand on her shoulder. "Just confess you took the money. That's all this is," he said. Clara screamed into the gag. "I didn't." but the cloth stole the sound. "Fine," Gus muttered. "Have at your way." They shoved her forward. The icy water swallowed her waist and then her chest. Clara kicked and fought, but the ropes cut deep, biting into her wrists. A sudden weight pressed her down, a rough hand forcing her under. Moonlight shattered above her like broken glass. Her lungs burned panic, twisting her insides. The world blurred into white flashes and dark swirls. She clawed at the water, at nothing, at everything. Her ears filled with a dull roar. "God, someone help me," she thought, drifting deeper. Her limbs slowed. Her vision faded until the water became a soft, wavering blur. Then through the shimmering veil, she saw something move beneath her. A shape, a shadow, a man's form rising from the depths like a spirit returning to the earth. Large hands reached for her waist. Her fading mind whispered, "Is this death?" The hands gripped her, strong, warm as fire. Then everything went black. The first thing Clara Boone felt was warmth, a slow, pulsing heat pressing against her chest. Then the taste of lake water forced itself from her lungs. She coughed and gasped, her body jerking as breath returned in painful waves. When her eyes fluttered open, the night sky spun above, stars blurred like smudges of silver across the dark. And then she saw him. A man knelt beside her, dark hair dripping onto his bare shoulders, bronzed skin streaked with water. His rough hands rested on either side of her face, steadying her as she fought for air. His chest rose and fell, still heaving from the effort of pulling her from the depths. She'd never seen an Apache warrior up close before. But she knew the stories whispered in Dusty Hollow. She knew the fears they had of him. But none of those stories spoke of eyes like his, steady, deep-set concern. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Clara shivered, lake water streaming off her clothes in rivulets. Her wrists were still bound. She lifted them slightly, confused and desperate. The man cut the rope with a knife made of obsidian. Its edge gleamed blue in the moonlight. When her hands were free, he gently turned her onto her side as another wave of coughing tore through her. "You breathe," he said quietly, his voice rough but calm. "Good." His voice carried the low timbre of someone used to silence someone who did not waste words. Clara sucked in air greedily. Across the lake, she could still see the distant figures of the three men scrambling into the trees, running as though chased by ghosts. They had left her for dead. The Apache glanced toward their retreating shapes, then touched her shoulder. "You safe?" Clara didn't know why, but when his hand brushed her, a jolt shot through her, not fear this time, but something warm, disorienting, and impossible to name in that moment of shock. He rose to his feet and lifted her effortlessly, as though she weighed no more than the wet cloth clinging to her body. She tried to speak. "Please don't take me back there," but only horse-like fragments came out. He pulled her closer against the cold wind. "Not to town," he murmured. "Too far, too cold. You die." His gaze swept over the dark forest. "Come." She didn't have the strength to resist even if she wanted to. Her head fell weakly against his shoulder as he carried her through the pines, each step steady, sure as though he could see perfectly in the dark. The sky hadn't yet touched the horizon when Clara stirred again. Her eyelids felt heavy, her body aching from throat to ribs. She blinked at the flickering glow beside her. She was lying on a bed of hide blankets wrapped in a thick woolen covering. A small clay bowl steamed near her cheek. The shadows above shifted wooden poles supporting a hide shelter. A lean figure crouched at her side. It was him. The Apache sat on his heels, one hand extended cautiously toward her forehead. He touched her skin lightly, checking her temperature. The moment his warm fingers grazed her, Clara startled. She jerked back with a soft gasp. He withdrew instantly, as if burned. "Cold," he said, his voice quieter than before. "Body must stay warm." Clara clutched the blanket to her chest, heart pounding wildly. Not from fear, but from something she couldn't yet understand. She remembered those same hands pressing life back into her lungs. She remembered the rush of breath, the heat of his mouth against hers, the world spinning back into place. Her cheeks flushed. The man noticed and shifted away, respectfully giving her space. He didn't ask questions, didn't crowd her. He simply tended the small fire, stirring the embers with a stick. Outside, the muffled murmurs of voices drifted in. Her stomach tightened. She didn't speak their language, but the tones carried suspicion, alarm, curiosity. She was an outsider in a world she had only heard about in fearful town gossip. The man spoke without looking up. "My village," he said. "You were not breathing. Night too cold. I bring you here." She swallowed hard. "My name is Clara Boone," she rasped. He nodded. "Talon. Just Talon. Short, strong, certain." When footsteps approached the tent, several figures gathered outside, murmuring to one another. Clara tensed. The flap opened, and an older woman entered first. Silver hair braided down her back. Her eyes sharpened when they rested on Clara Boone. But there was no hatred there, only weariness, grief, and wisdom. Behind her came two men, younger but stern, followed by a handful of women peering inside. They all looked from Clara to Talon Redfeather. A rapid exchange followed in Apache voices, rising and falling, questioning. Clara couldn't understand the words, but she felt the weight of them. Felt the tension coil inside the small space like a rope pulled too tight. Finally, the elder woman turned to Clara. Her voice was soft but edged with caution. "You were found in the sacred water." On the night of Talon's ritual, she gestured toward the lake in the distance. Many things unexplained. Talon rose to his full height, shoulders squared. He spoke firmly in Apache, and though Clara didn't understand the language, she felt the steadiness of his defense. She felt the quiet conviction in every word. The villagers exchanged glances, some doubtful, some afraid. At last, the elder gave a slow nod. 7 days, she declared, her English thick with accent. She stays, recovers. Then we see what the spirits say. The others withdrew reluctantly. When they left, Clara felt her breath return. She looked up at Talon, unsure how to thank him for saving her life that night. "Why?" she whispered. "Why help me?" Talon met her gaze, his eyes as calm as the mountains. "Because you were alive," he said simply. "And a life pulled from the water is given to the one who saves it." Her heartbeat flickered strangely at his words. Outside the village, the air buzzed with rumors, whispers of omens, fate, spirits, warnings. But inside the tent, Clara felt an unexpected stillness. A man she did not know had held her life in his hands. And for reasons she could not name, she no longer feared him. The next sunrise bathed the Apache camp in soft gold. But Clara woke long before the light reached the hide walls of Talon's lodge. She had not dreamed peacefully. Each time she drifted into sleep, the lake swallowed her again. Cold hands dragged her downward, but the nightmare always shifted in the final moment, just before darkness took her. Talon's arms appeared in the water, pulling her toward the surface. By the 5th time, this dream jolted her awake. Her pulse thundered in her ribs. Talon had kept the fire alive through the night. He sat cross-legged on a woven mat near the entrance, sharpening a blade with long, unhurried strokes. The soft rasp of stone against steel filled the quiet. He looked up as she stirred. "You sleep?" he asked, not a question, more like a gentle observation. "A little," Clara admitted, brushing damp strands of hair from her cheek. He studied her face, not boldly but carefully, as if checking whether the night had stolen more strength from her. When his hand lifted slightly as though to feel her forehead again, Clara flinched from instinct. His hand dropped instantly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to pull away." He merely nodded, accepting her fear without offense. There was a strange steadiness in him, like the earth beneath his feet never shifted him off balance. Outside voices rose, not angry, but tense, curious, suspicious. Clara swallowed. "They don't want me here, do they?" Talon paused, his sharpening. "Some do not. And you? His dark eyes settled on hers. I brought you so I protect you. It wasn't a declaration of affection, but something deeper: duty, belief, maybe even thought, and the way he said it made her chest tighten. A soft knock at the lodge frame broke the moment. The elder woman from the night before, her name was Mabel, ducked inside with a bowl of steaming broth. The scent of herbs and pine soot drifted in calming waves. You drink, Mabel said, offering it. Clara accepted it with trembling hands. Thank you. Mabel did not smile, but her expression softened by a fraction. You live because he saw you in the water. Her gaze rested briefly on Talon. This makes some speak, makes others fear. Clara felt her throat constrict. I never meant to bring trouble. Mabel placed a wrinkled hand on her shoulder. Trouble comes to all places, she said, but the spirits do not reveal their meaning in one night. With that, she left, her footsteps fading into the morning bustle. Clara drank slowly. The broth warmed her from the inside out, chasing away some of the night's chill. As she sipped, she watched Talon tie his hair with a leather strip, his movements precise and quiet. Will they ask me questions? She murmured. No, he replied, not until 7 days pass. Then after a beat he added, but they will watch. Clara didn't know why the thought of being watched made her heart beat faster, whether from fear or something more complicated. But when Talon Redfeather stood, Clara Boone felt a strange hollow ache at the thought of him stepping outside. He noticed her hesitation and said, I go only to speak with the others. I return soon. Then he left the flap of the lodge whispering shut behind him. The village around Clara was a world she had only read about in books. Low earthen lodges and hide tents clustered together, surrounded by juniper trees. Women tended small fires, men prepared bows or checked horses, and children raced barefoot through the dust. When Talon let her step outside to breathe the fresh air, the murmurs began immediately. They weren't cruel, not openly, but sharp enough to sting. Unhegane, some whispered. A woman from the outside, she came from the sacred water. Bad sign or good? No one knows. A young girl approached timidly, offering Clara a woven basket of berries. Before Clara could thank her, the girl darted away, giggling. That small act loosened something inside Clara's chest. Talon pointed to a shaded log near the fire pit. Sit, he instructed. Clara obeyed, wrapping her blanket tighter around herself. His presence beside her eased her nerves, though the rumors still lingered. What are they saying? She asked quietly. Talon glanced down at her as though deciding how much truth she could bear. They say you came from the water on the night of the moon, a crossing between worlds, he said, his voice low. That sounded terrifying. Clara's breath hitched. Sacred, he corrected. But sacred things make people uneasy. His gaze lingered on her face longer than usual. When she shifted slightly, her shoulder brushed his arm. A small spark shot up her spine. She wasn't sure if he felt it too. His expression remained unreadable, but he moved just enough to shield her from the cold mountain breeze. She shouldn't be noticing him so closely. Shouldn't be aware of how near he sat, how broad his shoulders were, how his voice softened when he spoke to her. But she did. Every time. By midday, Iris returned, carrying small tokens, carved stones, a length of leather, a feather dyed red. People give these, Iris explained. Some as protection, others to ask the spirits for guidance. Clara touched the objects, humbled. I hardly know how to thank them, she murmured. You show respect, Iris said. That is enough. Talon watched Clara run her fingers along the carved lines, her manner reverent. He said nothing, but something in his posture softened his shoulders, loosening his breath, steadying. Later, when Clara tried a few halting words of Apache she'd overheard from Iris, Talon blinked in surprise. You learn fast, he murmured. I want to understand, Clara said softly, then corrected herself. Understand you. A faint, almost invisible shift crossed his features like the first stir of wind before a storm. He rose and offered his hand to help her stand. When she placed her palm in his, warmth spread through her arms so suddenly she nearly gasped. He steadied her with quiet, steady care. That night, sleep eluded Clara. Every time her eyes closed, she felt the sensation of sinking, the desperate gasp for air. And always she remembered the moment Talon's hands had caught her waist, holding her firm against the current. She touched her ribs lightly, remembering his breath against hers as he forced life back into her lungs. Her heart thudded not with fear this time, but with something gentler, something dangerously close to longing. Outside, Talon kept watch. She heard his footsteps, soft as breath, pacing the perimeter of the lodge. And though she knew she should be frightened, Clara felt safer in that tent than she had ever felt in Dusty Hollow. Safer and far more vulnerable. The days slipped by with a strange rhythm, half healing, half discovery. Clara had never known a place where silence carried such weight. In Dusty Hollow, silence meant judgment, suspicion, condemnation. But here in the Apache camp, tucked against the sheltering pines, silence felt like a living, watchful thing, patient, offering space for breath to steady and thoughts to settle. And always she felt Talon somewhere near. On the third morning, Clara woke to the soft scrape of a bowl being set beside her bed of hides. Talon crouched nearby, steam rising from the broth he had prepared. He didn't speak at first, only waited for her to gather herself from the tangle of dreams that still pulled at her mind. "You sleep better?" he asked. Clara nodded. A little. The nightmares still came, but now they dissolved faster, like mist burned away by sunlight. In those dreams, it wasn't always terror that gripped her. It was the feeling of being held, pulled upward, saved. Talon watched her sip the warm broth. His gaze wasn't intrusive. It was steady grounding. And the more time she spent near him, the more she understood that steadiness was part of who he was, built into him, like bone. Later that morning, Iris appeared and gave Clara a woven satchel. "Come," she instructed. "Women gather herbs today." Clara followed them into the sunlit clearing beyond the camp. The air smelled of crushed juniper and warm earth. Iris taught her which plants cooled a fever, which soothed a cough, and which healed wounds. Clara Boone practiced the new Apache words, carefully repeating them until she saw approval flicker in Iris's eyes. When they returned to the camp, Clara found Talon Redfeather waiting near the lodge, arms crossed loosely, watching the path. "You learned," he said, noting the herbs in her satchel. "I'm trying," she replied. "Your language is beautiful." A faint, almost surprised smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. It softened his features, warming the shadows beneath his eyes. "Come," he said, motioning toward the ridge. "I'll show you something." He led her up a narrow path that wound through the rocks. Clara followed, careful not to trip on loose gravel. At the top, the world opened before her, mountains, stretching toward the horizon. Sunlight catching on distant cliffs, the wind brushing her hair like a gentle hand. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Talon stood beside her, not quite touching but close enough that the warmth of him cut through the mountain chill. "This is where I listen," he said quietly, "where the world speaks without words." Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind fill her lungs. "It feels like everything is a little clearer up here." Talon glanced at her, something unreadable shifting behind his dark eyes. "You listen well." The compliment hit Clara with unexpected force. She had been called many things in Dusty Hollow: naive, foolish, troublesome, but never capable, never seen. Standing here with him, she felt like the world had space for her again. They stayed there for a long time, watching the sky deepen into late afternoon blues. And though they spoke little, it felt as though something important passed between them. In the quiet, an understanding not built of words, but of shared breath and shared ground. That evening, as the village gathered around a fire for their meal, Clara sat with the women, helping grind roots for medicine. Children tugged at her sleeves, asking in a mix of gestures and simple phrases for stories. She laughed a sound she hadn't heard from herself in months, and told them short tales of faraway rivers and fireflies bright as lanterns. Every time she laughed, Talon looked up from across the fire, and every time their eyes met, Clara felt her heartbeat stumble. She wondered if the others noticed. Judging by the murmurs around the circle, they did. "She learns his tongue too quickly," someone whispered. "She was pulled from the sacred water," another murmured. "They are tied now. The spirits choose stranger paths." Clara pretended not to hear, but that night, as she sat outside the lodge, letting the cool air brush her face, Talon approached quietly. "You are troubled," he said. She hesitated. "They talk about me, about us." Talon's jaw tightened slightly. "Let them talk. Words cannot hurt unless you carry them." Clara looked up at him, meeting the calm strength in his eyes. "I just don't want to bring harm to your people." "You don't," he said firmly. "You bring change. Change is harder to carry, but not harmful." The warmth those words brought to her chest almost scared her. She wasn't used to someone believing in her. A gust of wind swept through the camp, lifting the strands of her hair. Talon reached out instinctively, catching the blanket at her shoulders before it slipped. His fingers brushed her cheek lightly, unintentionally. Yet it felt electric. She gasped softly. He drew his hand back, but not quickly, not as if ashamed, but as if reluctant. "Rest," he murmured. She nodded, though her heart was beating far too fast for rest. Inside the lodge, as she lay awake, listening to the soft hush of Talon's footsteps outside on his nightly watch, Clara pressed a hand to her chest. She knew fear. She knew desperation. But this feeling, this warm, trembling hope, was something else entirely. And it frightened her more sweetly than anything ever had. News traveled through Dusty Hollow, the way dust rides the wind, quiet at first, then choking. It began 3 days after Clara disappeared. Jeb Pierce and his men returned from Moonwater Lake, breathless, trembling, and drunk on fear. They spun a story so wild that even the most suspicious townsfolk hesitated to believe it. She threw herself in, Zeke insisted, at the saloon, slamming whiskey back like it was an antidote. Didn't want the law on her neck. Gus added, "Swear on my life something rose up from that lake, something not human." The men nodded vigorously, desperate to stitch lies tight enough to cover the truth. Dusty Hollow's councilmen didn't care about the truth. They preferred anything that kept their hands clean, so they let the rumors take root. Clara Boone had taken her own life out of shame. Case closed. Convenient. Easy. But life was never that easy. Back in the Apache village, Clara didn't know how deeply those lies had sunk into the town she'd once trusted. She only felt unease growing with each passing day, like something was pulling at her, like a thread unraveling from a seam. On the morning of the 7th day, Talon Redfeather approached Clara Boone's lodge. She knew it was him by the soft weight of his steps, the steady shadow he cast against the high door. Her heartbeat picked up just hearing him near. He entered slowly. "You breathe better." He observed his eyes scanning her face, lingering on the color returning to her cheeks. "Yes," she replied, her voice trembling. "Because of you. Because of all of you." She hoped he didn't notice, but he did. Talon crouched in front of her. "Your mind is not resting." Clara hesitated. "I keep thinking someone might still be searching for me." His eyes darkened, the memories of the men who hurt her surfacing. "Yes," she whispered, swallowing hard. "They won't stop unless someone stops them." Talon's jaw tightened. A flicker of anger passed beneath his calm surface, like heat beneath stone. "If they come here," he said quietly, "they will not leave with victory." His voice held no threat, only certainty. But Clara knew what it would cost the tribe if trouble followed her here. She couldn't bear the thought. "I need to go back," she whispered. Talon's breath caught so slightly she almost missed it. "Back to the town." Clara nodded, her fingers twisting in her lap. "To clear my name, to face them." to stop them before they hurt someone else. For a long moment he said nothing. His eyes traveled over her face, searching for fear, doubt, hesitation, and finding none. "You cannot go alone," he said. Clara lifted her gaze. "I know." Talon rose to his full height, his shoulders broad, and his posture straight, filled with resolve. "Then I go with you." The relief that washed over Clara was unexpected and overwhelming. She didn't try to hide it. Iris arrived moments later, drawn as if she sensed the decision being made. Iris studied them, with eyes sharpened by countless winters. "You return to the White Town?" she asked. "Danger waits there." Clara dipped her head. "I must." Iris's gaze softened. A woman who chooses truth does not walk an easy road. Talon stepped beside Clara, close enough that she felt his warmth radiating through her thin cloak. "She will not walk alone," he said. Iris looked between them, something knowing flickering across her face. She whispered a blessing under her breath, a low murmur carried by the wind. The ride toward Dusty Hollow felt like crossing into another world. The sky stretched wide overhead, pale blue, streaked with early morning gold. Talon rode slightly ahead, muscles moving with his horse as if carved from the very earth they traveled. Clara watched him when he wasn't looking. How the sun glowed against his hair. How the wind tugged at the beaded tie that kept it back. How the line of his jaw tightened whenever she winced from lingering pain. She shouldn't notice these things, but she did not. Now not with danger ahead. By the time they reached the town's outskirts, Clara's palms were damp against the reins. Talon shifted his horse beside hers. "You breathe too fast," he observed. "I'm scared," she admitted, trying not to let her voice break. Talon leaned closer, his tone low and steady. "Fear means you still value your life. That is good." He paused. "And I am here." The simple words steadied her more than any sermon ever had. When they entered the town square, all movement stopped. Men froze mid-step. Women stopped drawing water. Children stared wide-eyed. Clara Boone had not died, and she had returned with an Apache warrior at her side. Whispers cracked like dry twigs. "She's alive. Impossible. Then the story's wrong, or she's cursed." Deputy Cole Turner stepped forward first, sputtering. "Miss Boone, what the devil? Where have you been? Folks said you drowned." Clara's voice cut through the air, sharper than she intended. "Or that I ran. Or that I confessed to stealing." The crowd flinched. Talon dismounted with quiet grace, his presence alone enough to make grown men step back. His hand rested lightly on the obsidian knife at his hip, not drawing it, just reminding them he didn't fear any of them. Clara faced the town she once trusted. "Jeb Pierce stole the school funds," she declared. "When I confronted him, his men tied me, dragged me to Moonwater Lake, and held me under until I stopped breathing." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Clara looked at each familiar face, people who had let lies bury her. "Talon saved my life," she said, her voice steady. "If not for him, I would be dead." Talon scanned the men who had assaulted her. Zeke paled. Gus's knees shook, and Jeb Pierce, brutish and loud, looked like he might faint on the spot. "You saw something in that water," Talon said, stepping forward. "Something you feared more than truth." Zeke cracked first. "We didn't mean to kill her," he blurted, his voice shaking. "They told us it was her. They said that Rude shoved her." Zeke muttered, "Shut up," but it was too late. The truth was already rising like breath breaking through water. As dust lifted from the restless earth and the town broke into shouts, Clara Boone felt Talon Redfeather shift closer, shielding her with his body. In that moment, she understood something fierce and undeniable. Going back had been dangerous, but going alone would have meant death. And Talon, calm and steadfast, had stepped into danger, not because he had to, but because somewhere in those days Between the water and the waking, Clara had become someone he couldn't turn away from. When the dust settled in the town, justice, slow and reluctant, finally stirred awake. Jeb Pierce was dragged from the Silver Mule Saloon, cursing like a devil cornered. His ledgers were seized, his debts exposed, and the frightened babbling of his men sealed his fate. By sundown, the town council had no choice but to order his arrest and call for a marshal from Santa Fe to take him into custody. But none of it felt like a victory to Clara. Standing in the center of the town, where neighbors once smiled at her, she felt only the brittle quiet of disappointment. She had survived. She thought she had, but she no longer recognized this place as home. Talon stood at the edge of the crowd, his presence solid and unshakable like old granite. He didn't touch her, not here, but his nearness warmed her blood, steadying her when the weight of betrayal threatened to buckle her. When it was over, when Jeb was shackled and led away, Clara turned from the square without a word. Talon followed, leaving behind a town that murmured more questions than answers. They walked until the buildings fell away, and only the crunch of sand and sagebrush filled the silence. Clara stopped beneath a lone cottonwood tree, its branches rattling softly above her. "I can't stay here," she whispered. Talon didn't ask why. He didn't need to. "This place," she said, her voice cracking, "watched me dragged away and did nothing. They buried me before I was even gone." Talon stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she felt his warmth through the cool afternoon air. "You live," he said softly. "You breathe. That is power they cannot take." Tears blurred her vision. She wiped them away with the back of her wrist. "I don't know where to go," she confessed. Talon's jaw flexed a quiet emotion, tightening the muscles in his throat. "You have a place," he said, "if you want it." She looked up sharply. "In your village?" He nodded. The breath she drew in trembled all the way to the bottom of her lungs. She imagined the shadows of the teepees at dusk, the smell of juniper smoke, the soft murmur of women tending their fires. She thought of children laughing, of Iris's wise eyes, of the open mountains that felt more honest than any church sermon she'd ever heard. And she thought of Talon, of his steady hands, his presence, that had made the silence feel like peace. "Yes," she murmured, "take me back." Talon didn't move for a long moment. Then he offered his hand, not to command, not to pull, but simply to share the next step. She placed her hand in his, and the world steadied beneath her feet. The sun dipped behind the hills by the time they reached the Apache village. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and lanterns lit the pathways like quiet fireflies. People emerged from their lodges as Talon led Clara toward Mabel's home. Mabel watched their approach, her wise gaze missing nothing. "You returned," she said to Clara. "Yes," Clara replied, her voice quiet but firm. "If the tribe allows it, I want to stay. I want to teach the children. I want to help." Mabel studied her for several slow heartbeats. Finally, she nodded once. "You may stay." Relief washed over Clara so swiftly her knees nearly gave way. Whispers rippled through the camp, some hesitant, many curious, a few quietly pleased. Children peeked from behind their mothers. A young woman approached with a shy smile and placed a woven sash in Clara's hands, a gesture of welcome. But it was Talon's expression that caught her breath. He stood a few steps behind his shoulders, easing the tension he had carried for days, slipping away like a shed skin. When Clara met his gaze, his look rose in her cheeks, not fear now, but something gentler, fuller. That night, the tribe shared a quiet meal around the central fire. Clara sat beside Talon, the flickering light painting warm tones across his face. Every now and then, their shoulders brushed lightly, but each touch felt like a promise. She felt the warmth of the fire on her skin. She felt Talon's warmth in her bones. Later, as they walked toward the lodge, Mabel had offered her. Clara paused when she sensed Talon behind her. "You chose to stay," he said. "I chose life," she corrected softly, "and you helped me find it." He stepped closer. The night air grew still. "The river gave you back," he said, "maybe for a reason." Clara's pulse fluttered against her throat. Maybe it gave me back. For you. Talon's breath hitched a tiny sound, barely audible, yet it struck her deeply. He lifted his hand slowly, giving Clara Boone time to pull away if she wished. She didn't. His fingers brushed her cheek, tracing the faint scar left by the rope burn. "No more water," he said, his voice low. "No more drowning." His thumb lingered near her lips, warm and careful. "Not while I breathe." Clara placed her hand over his, her skin fitting against his palm, as though it was made for it. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. "Not with you." For a heartbeat they simply stood there, two souls stitched together by a night of moonlit water. Two lives rerouted by fate's strange, dangerous generosity. Talon Redfeather lowered his forehead to hers in a gesture that was both intimate and reverent. Clara breathed him in the scent of cedar earth, the faint warmth of smoke, and felt something inside her settle, like stepping into a place she had always belonged. He drew back just enough to meet her eyes. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "I'll show you where the river begins." "And after that?" she asked. He hesitated, then smiled, a rare, quiet smile that reached his eyes. "After that, we walk whatever path the spirits give us." Clara threaded her fingers through his. "Then I will walk it with you." Above them, the stars glittered like scattered embers. Behind them, the village hummed with new acceptance and old stories. Before them, the river whispered, endlessly flowing, endlessly renewing. And for the first time since the lake swallowed her, Clara felt completely, beautifully alive.